Soda, calm down. Still waking up. It's like 4 in the morning. Okay, there we go. Oh, so yeah. So yeah, I think one of the hardest things to do is to admit your weaknesses as a human being, as a Christian, as in society. I mean, it's just hard. You try to prepare yourself to be vulnerable, but it's not easily achieved. You can't really, no matter how much you can mentally prepare yourself to be opened up, to be made vulnerable, you still never really can prepare yourself for what results from the vulnerability. Christ knew that he had to drink the cup, but he did not know necessarily how the Father was going to fulfill his promise to him. Um, like I was saying before, relationships. It is important for us to understand that the reference point is never our neighbor so much more as our reference point is always God and society around us. That's why I was trying to say that, as far as society is concerned, as long as we are an adulterous society, it doesn't matter whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, because we still have a fundamental flaw in our society where we betray the idea of having proper and safe and healthy monogamous relationships, regardless of your attraction. There's already a fundamental breakdown in society. So to go against one while reinforcing the other does not solve the fundamental flaw. And I think that as Christians, this is how we have to see how the devil works, in the sense the Hegelian dialectic, where you try to control the expressions of two different opposing sides in order to prevent the third option from being able to actually free themselves from your control. So, in most issues in politics or even in religion, you see that everything has been shoehorned to one side or the other. But when you really get down to and you get to the people who really like know this stuff personally, they're never on one or the other sides. There's always so much nuance that gets them between one side or the other that defines them. I mean, again, we get onto the abortion issue. I have yet to meet, honestly, any Christian who's like, yeah, let's stone people who get abortions. I just don't meet them. That's not a thing. But that's something that you hear as a potential conclusion of what legislation against abortion would be. But that's not the intended view of any of the people that I talk to. More so, it's this idea that they're so appalled by the idea that we refuse to acknowledge the idea that we're ending a human life that they want to legislate against it in order to prevent this decay of what they believe the valuing of human life is. So in reality, had the conversation not been steered towards the idea of human beings being a parasite until they reached a viable point, which they then graduated from being a parasite to an actual human being, then we would never had a conversation on whether or not abortion had to be completely banned in such a harsh manner as we see being applied in certain states, especially once we got into the issue of being federalized. So you see this idea of the issue being taken past what it could be in terms of compromising and being made into something it isn't. I mean, personally, I think it should be handled in the best ways. In the best way is like organ donations. Christians, a large amount of Christians don't do organ donations, at least not in the sense of post-mortem organ donations. I was always raised because my parents are related to, they're involved in county stuff. They straight up told me, don't do organ donations. Just because of the context of how they get them from cadavers and dead bodies and stuff like that die on the side of the road, and how that has to deal with funeral rites and stuff like that. It can get really icky, especially out here in California. So there are reasons why some people do not do organ donations, and it can be treated a similar way in the sense of, if we're concerned about medical abortions or abortions in cases of rape, then we make it very clear that in cases of rape, abortion's viable, right, right in there. The act of intruding upon somebody's physical integrity to force them to reproduce is wrong, and we all agree on that. So I think that that's something that everybody unilaterally could legislate, something where in cases of rape, you could automatically have the right to an abortion. No court, no nothing like that. Um, then when you break down to the idea of medical abortions, if you're trying to avoid the idea of having to go to court and dealing with all that kind of stuff, the best way of handling that, I would say, would be to legislate it based on the idea of organ donations, in the sense that I, as a woman, would prefer, or I, as a man, even, would prefer to have relationships with people who, automatically can tell, automatically know, like, hey, look, it's right here. If I have a child, I'm donating that child to science. Like, it's going to be aborted, it's going to be medically donated. Then it is clear where the child's going. It's clear what's going to happen should you involve yourself with somebody. In most cases, I would say that if you were to be going drinking with somebody or going to get to know somebody, eventually you're going to see their license or get to know them in that kind of way. Um, so I personally think that in terms of vetting people, much like you would need to do with STDs in general, I think the STD screening should be something that people should, if we're going to force people to admit things or have to do things, I think that we should force people to have something that identifies them as being possibly a contaminant to other people should they be introduced to them in the wrong contexts. Because spitting, blood, needle swapping, hell, I know a bunch of people who got a bunch of fucking diseases just from sharing a pipe. Not even like a crack pipe. I'm just talking about like just smoking weed. So again, I think that the way that we try to define society, we screw ourselves because we have this idea of right or wrong, when really we have the idea of chaotic versus orderly. Now, good contains both order and chaos, evil contains both order and chaos. The Lord contains order and chaos, the devil utilizes order and chaos. The powers of both are applicable to everybody who just is able to see and utilize information. It's part of being an observer and able to replicate what you observe. So, going back to this idea of trying to figure out useful solution, what then would be we've already figured out compromises that would benefit, the pro-abortion side. What about those who are anti-abortion? Well, then you would legislate things that would focus on trying to grow family, trying to promote the idea of women finding a sense of financial and social independence from having pregnancy. Whether they're in a relationship or not, I don't know if that's something we have to then further discuss in terms of whether you're talking about this in a religious stance or in a social stance. If we stick to a social stance, then we should only focus on it on the idea that getting women to love their children and to desire to have children should be important to us because, again, if you look at China, look at other countries who don't care about the environment, who don't care about having proper environmentally safe means by which they industrialize their nations, they don't care whatsoever about how many kids they have. It's us who want to lower our birth rate when we've already conformed to environmental laws as far as we can, and we're only going to do so more. And on top of that, we have less children. We are not going to be even viable threats to the environment in another 100 years at the rate the world's going. It's very easy for America to get toppled over by the world governments that exist. And so to think of this idea that we need to kill our children, that is what I think most people who are religious find so reprehensible. And even those who are non religious, because I know people who are non religious that are against abortion just because they think it's not right to have a lot of abortions. So after a certain point, most people think that you shouldn't just have a shit ton of abortions. So one discussion we need to have that I don't think is had off enough is How much is too much? Some people just straight up would say none are. None is too much. And I think that that's a fair enough argument to make. Personally, for me, if you believe that infanticide is okay and you're willing to admit it's infanticide, that's my only caveat, is you have to admit it's a human life you're ending, then I would let you have an abortion. Because you admitted that you believe that you should have the right to end the child's life if the child's not going to have a good life or you're not going to want to take care of the child. At least you told me where you're at, you're admitting to the honesty of what you're doing, and you admitted to what the intended effect of society would be, which is the end of a potential human life, which would replace you should you die in an accident. More importantly, since you're basing your whole idea of killing your child probably off of your own lack of happiness in life, then more often than not, you're replacing a life based off the idea that it's going to have a worse life because your 20 or 30 years was not fruitful. You're ending the potential of another human life because their life might not be fruitful because your life is not fruitful. Again, the idea is that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but that's the kind of general idea that people get from talking to pro-abortionists. A lot of people at the end of the day, they go, "What? I don't want to raise a child in a life that is subpar." That's a fair enough argument. I'm not saying that that isn't a good argument to have. It is an argument, but it is an argument that you have to be honest about. And this argument that we are not honest about in discussion. We very quick are about it's only about rape or medical conditions, when in reality that's a subset of all abortions performed by Planned Parenthood and all of what Planned Parenthood does with the aborted fetus parts. I mean, again, we catch them time and time again doing this, and the only way they have to get away with it is going, but these guys, and but these people aren't our bias. That's not a good enough reason to lie about what you're doing with what your industry is propagating itself on. They do have a huge model of Planned Parenthood based around abortions. That's another argument that people get stuck in a Hegelian dialectic around. If you admit to the fact that yes, Planned Parenthood does cater and does benefit from having people commit abortions, then we can have an honest discussion about it. What is the function of private healthcare providers or public healthcare providers in the abortion argument? Should it be solely an issue between the individual and the state? Or should private healthcare providers and public healthcare providers have a huge amount of say in propagating the interest for or against abortions? That is a discussion that should be held, but we don't hold it because we think that it's just beneath us, I guess. I don't know. So another issue that we can kind of get on this that I've talked about before when I was talking about sexuality and my issues with going through and my experiences with sexuality and my struggles with I guess in terms of the closest I would come to being personally experiencing the LGBT situation in my own life. My issue was always about the idea that it's not about whether or not I'm heterosexual or homosexual. The question was, do I want to have a family? Could I have a family or not? As a child growing up, it was not reasonable for me to assume that I was going to be anything more than a 40-year-old virgin. Thank God that wasn't true, but to a certain extent, part of me wishes that that was. So, sometimes you get what you ask for, right? Life sucks. And then other times, life doesn't suck. You just have to be careful for what you ask for and how you go about seeking it. That's a whole side tangent. But in thinking about my life, I didn't think that I would have a relationship, but I knew I wanted to raise children. I knew I wanted to be a good partner, but I just could not imagine that somebody would ever just stand, put up with, or even want to be with me to get to that point. Or if they get with me, I just could not fathom they would stay with me. I always imagined a divorce would just happen in my life. That's why, for me, though I am extremely liberal, I always had a preference for conservative leanings. I accepted that life was liberal, but I was always desiring a conservative lifestyle. So I could definitely see how, as I grew older, I definitely started taking on to more conservative leanings. That doesn't mean I left a lot of my progressive leanings aside. I mean, I'm still interested in socialism and trying to figure out a way to localize it When things are brought outside of their context and outside of their proper frame of actualization, they become an invasive species. Thoughts are like invasive species, habits are like invasive species. Um, so, in a way, when you take socialism out of its context, out of the proper realm by which each state and locality can actually apply it, and honestly, I think in most cases it only can be applied in just a community basis through faith groups, through people agreeing on groups. It doesn't necessarily be that we align ourselves underneath God, but people can align themselves on the idea of, okay, we want fathers and mothers in inner cities. Boom. Fathers, mothers, inner city fathers, mothers. Something like that. Parents for the inner city. There you go. You start a community group called Parents for the Inner City, and you will really work as a community, as a county, as a state to get every single county to have parents in the inner city, targeting single parents, troubled couples, people who are struggling raising their children. And you try to get them together. You try to help them fellowship. You try to get them benefits. You try to help them get the educational benefits. You try to get public education benefits, and you really try to engage them like that. And you would create the same effect, I believe, that could be found in most religious groups, because that's what they try to do inside their inner community. Um, let's look at a greater issue. Or no, actually, let's stick to the issue at hand. Um, Again, this is on random, so I'm really just winging it because it's the crack of dawn and I don't have much else to do. I'm literally just kind of sitting up listening to Jordan Peterson. I love the guy. Stopped listening to him for a couple months. Getting back into him is kind of hard because I just can't focus. It's not even like because of the whole Kermit the Frog thing. It's just legitimately like I just can't focus. Before it was because I just could not separate him from the Kermit the Frog meme, which was really messing with me after a while because I was like having the most deep, intense thoughts, but with Kermit the Frog's voice kind of playing off of me as I'm like sitting there arguing with him, like, is that actually a reasonable idea, Kermit? Damn it, Peterson. Anyways, so when I think about the idea of trying to form my identity, gender was a fraction of it, yes. But really, it came into the idea of what is the proper role in society. So, but to the same extent, this desire to have children at all costs, even if I have to raise them myself or even clone myself, which again, I was a child when I really thought about it and realized like yeah, I'm not doing well with my peers. I know where I'm at on a hierarchy and where I'm able to apply myself right now. I don't see myself doing much better as I get older. See where my brothers are at, I see where other people are at, I see where I'm at. Yeah, I either need to go through huge changes or something's not going to work out. That was how I thought at a very young age because I was trying to think very rationally from a very young age. Um, Somewhat to my benefit, somewhat to my detriment. Um, so in forming this identity, to look at the idea of raising kids on your own, you have to take on both aspects of femininity and masculinity. And it wasn't like my father wasn't feminine. In fact, if anything, the fact that my father was masculine in the sense that his military training and his life experience did bring in masculine into him. But then again, what did I do as a child? We gardened. We didn't go fishing. We didn't go hunting. We didn't go camping. But I didn't do that. He lived in New York. So for me, like, I didn't grow up with traditional masculine roles, some would say. But to me, gardening is a traditionally masculine role because it was given to me in a sense of, how do you plant? How do you grow things? How do you, start things off? How do you begin to become a farmer? So then the idea of desiring to be a farmer took on this idea of asexuality. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that asexuality conceptually is a norm. The Hegelian dialectic is what makes us think that male and female is a norm, but asexuality is the meta norm. Adam and Eve came from Adam, but Adam ultimately was a replication of the image of man that is in God. So, in that sense, the asexual concept underlies or overarcs the subsets that um, are I can't freaking focus just to waking up. The subsets that are then expressed by reality. So you have the potential. I can go left, I can go right. But in reality, the real choice is that you can walk at all. If you can't walk, you can't go left and you can't go right. So it's the conditions which you can express which allow you to then express those conditions. Male and female is the same way. So your perceptions on asexuality define what male and female can be. So what a warrior is asexually as a concept defines what a male warrior and a female warrior could be, what their potential would be, if they're even able to be. So, in sense, breaking the illusion of the you know gender argument that is being discussed by society, the feminists are right in the sense that femininity has been shoehorned into one or the other. There is not a genuine, real sense of femininity in society anymore. And to the men's benefit, there isn't of men anymore. Both genders have been bastardized to their consumeristic expressions of themselves. And I think that that is ultimately what both sides are trying to fight against, but they're fighting each other rather than banding together to find an identity of what the asexual goal is, because the asexual goal is expressed through relationships, through the monogamous relationship. And when the monogamous relationship breaks down, when the social identity and the ability to find a center within your gender and acceptance of your natural traits within your gender happen, then you can't form a good heterosexual bond. Homosexuality becomes the only way to express those proper pure bonding aspects of our society, and thus it becomes almost a it is a precondition by which homosexuality can flourish. Um, so again, if you want to solve the feminist menace debate, what you really need to do is you need to figure out what is it asexually, meta narratively, that defines humanity. What does it mean to be human? Then from there, the genders can express themselves as they wish. When the asexual concept of mankind is that we are able to be both builders and destroyers, then it becomes easy to see how both genders have similar traits. But when you see humanity as, progressing from the state of, I don't know, humanity as, you know, the mentors of the earth or something, and that's solely mankind's role. Well, then it becomes, well, then who takes on that role conceptually, and who takes on the role conceptually of the nurtured? Well, then that's how you can kind of get into the idea of how women get pushed into subservience. Now, there's this idea that paganism and the spiritualism frees women from subservience, but I don't actually think that that's accurate to the biological, historical, and thus evolutionary evidence that we could find in in practice of that kind of trope. You have societies that exalt women, yes, but they're almost always invariably a side effect of a patriarchy, in a sense, a genuine patriarchy, because it's a monarchy usually that allows them to get into power. Actually, no, usually it's monarchy. Usually it's the subset of monarchy or noblism that allows women to rise to the sense of empowerment in ancient societies. There's very few cases of woman nomadic tribes rising to prominence or kingdomship. And even in those cases, it's usually through agreements for trade alliances, through breeding, that they maintain this. Now they use extreme social uh, and again biological pressures, usually through euthanasia or through purging male children or stuff like that in order to promote this. But again, there's usually a lot of modifications in order to promote this kind of system by which women rise to the forefront. But again, is this natural to mankind, or is this a subset of how certain kinds of human societies build themselves? I think that that's really what we have to question. I think certain kinds of human societies build themselves to be dominating against the genders by both using men as cannon fodder, but also by using women as, baby makers. Now, is that the Christian norm? I don't actually think so. The story of Adam and Eve makes it very clear that the animosity between men and women is one of your desire will be for your husband, but he will lord over you. So the idea is that women will always desire to be one with their husbands, but their husbands, for fear of vulnerability, will always lord over them. Because the curse of man is that the man will always toil, he will always suffer, he'll always be cursed. He'll always be poisoned in a sense. The female Eve, in a sense, was cursed with the idea of not childbirth being laborsome. Actually, it was that she will suffer in general. She will find more suffering in the world through the means. It was the same curse that man got, it just was towards her role. And it was also reflective towards her specific dichotomy role or so there's dichotomy in Christianity, which the role of femininity is related to the church. So there's that idea as well that because she is the seed by which humanity is saved, Adam is the seed by which all of humanity is established. So all human beings are children of Adam, but not all people are children of Eve. In the sense that though Eve is all of our mother, the genes, the latent genome and information that's inside of us that allows us to become Edonic, in a sense, is not actuated in most human beings. And I think that this is the difference between what God means you need to be made new. I think that the biological and mental and physical changes that happen to you when you become a practicing Christian, and I don't mean in like a true sense a practicing Christian, like I'm not fully practicing Christian. I know Christians who eat according to the Bible. I know religious denominations who live according to biblical laws. They are genetically different. Not vastly different from the rest of us, but they have actuated different parts of their genome and in their DNA that is able to be passed on to their kids and is able to be tracked. That's notable. That means that there's something inside of us that is like mitochondria. It is active, but it is not overwhelming us. Could it? Maybe that's what it's like to be a whole new person. Maybe when God comes, the mitochondria aspect of ourselves will take over, and the weaker human aspect of us will fade away. Maybe that's why we have to genetically modify ourselves in order to prevent this. I mean, again, what is technology? Technology is dead materials being added to us to then allow us to extend our lives. We become living statues in order to live longer. That's one option of human evolution. The other option of human evolution is genetic modification. We become mighty men, Nephilim, in order to survive the coming times. Or, or we just continue to do whatever we want and we just be regular old human beings. Or, and I think that that's the world, the normal world. This will be people who think they're going their own way, who are living their own life, but in reality, they're just accepting subservience and second class citizenship to the rest of those other creatures that are going to be created. And then you have the last class, the remnant. And the remnant, I think, will be the seed of Eve, the child born in the wilderness. The child born in the wilderness is Christ, but his body is not fully formed yet. When the sum of the Gentiles is met, that's when the end comes. So, sorry, I'm stuffy. It's really cold outside, and it's still 5 in the morning. So technically, I don't even know why I'm up. You guys should watch me take a nap on live YouTube. Oh. No, I've been hitting this mic the whole darn time, probably. So yeah, um, sorry, thinking about the seed of the woman. Yeah, so I'm becoming Christian, and it's not about becoming Christian. This is why I think there needs to be a distinction between what being a Christian religiously and being of Christ genetically would mean. People who are born to Christian families have the potential to be of Christ, but not Christian. But just because they're of Christ does not mean that they are in Christ. Of the vine does not mean you're in the vine. It just means that you're the fruit of the vine. So the fruit of your parents' Christian living and Christian worship defines your views and your reactions to Christianity, plus your choices and whatnot, but still. So, in a similar vein, society is a byproduct of whatever vine that it comes from. So, if your society is violent, murderous, sensual, malicious, then it comes from a vine that is like that. If there's an aspect of your society that isn't, then you need to figure out what part of the vine that is. Now, good plant husbandry is being able to find and cultivate which plants or which parts of your plants are budding fruitfully and which aren't. And you clip those on the vine in order to allow them to produce the self maintenance of the plant. Now, once the plant is spreading itself and starts to establish more of itself across the stretch of land, the trick then becomes purging weak vines from the strong vines to leave only the stronger vines so that you can make more and more stronger fruit. Um, so the idea of why there are so many denominations is similar. There are many different types of olive trees, many different types of grapevines, but all of them come from the original vine and the original um, grape or the original olive tree and the original vine, which is Christ. Christ on the cross produced everything. So from that, you get these derivatives. Now, the derivatives are not a replacement for the original, just like how humanity, us right now, are not a replacement for the original Adam. No matter how close we get to Christ in this flesh, we will always be of the first type. The seed of the woman is in us, but has yet not yet begun to bloom. It'll bloom when Christ comes, because it needs the light of God, the glory of God, to come to fruition, to its full strength, to its full nourishment. So when God comes, He will nourish us like the sun. He will nourish us like with water, and we will grow, begin to sprout, and we will see fruit from us like no other. But that could begin now, and that's the thing. Is a vine killed because it produces fruit in one season, but then withers in the winter for rising again the coming summer? Likewise, when we are made again new in Christ, we are confirmed, yes. The seed in us is confirmed, the vine in us is confirmed. Yes, we are still weak. We can be made perfect to a certain extent, but we'll never be in flawless. There we go, that's the term I'm looking for. We'll never be flawless before Christ. And so, because we'll never be flawless before Christ, we have to consider that aspect of ourselves. What does it mean to be human if we'll never be perfect before Christ when we know that Christ is the image by which humanity is truly revealed? The menotype, the asexual man. Ultimately, to be human is to be masculine. It is the evolutionarily and socially desired um, trait for both genders to have a certain sense of masculinity. So, as far as being human in the terms of Adam is concerned, is to be masculine. Whether you're a woman or a man, to be masculine is to be a child of Adam. To be effeminate would be to be a child of Eve. And perhaps this is why humility and docility is a trait of the church, but also of women, but also of men who adopt a Christian lifestyle, and usually the best of them. Paul was very much of Adam, but when he met Christ, he became like Eve. Eve went against that role with Adam, and thus was cursed to it. But I think that a lot of the curses had to do with the exact opposite of what the other being wanted. So the serpent was cursed to be stuck on the earth, to not be allowed to leave, to serve its role as a seraphim. It was forced to eat dirt or dust, which implies death. It's implied that it's supposed to eat death all of its life rather than life. So the seraphim may have been a seraphim that was involved in the garden and in maintaining the garden, in the life in the garden, a watcher maybe even. Uh, and from that, he was corrupted. So cursed to eat death all days of your life kind of reflects this idea that death comes from the serpent. More importantly, and your seed will be an enmity with the seed of the woman, or in you will be an enmity with the seed of the woman. Though I think in some contexts it's your seed, so I need to double check that. But anyways, the fact that this being will be an enmity with the seed of the woman makes me wonder if the first is implied, and it really means that just that one being will be an enmity with the seed of women. Well, other than the plethora of dragon myths that we have, dragons kidnapping princesses, who would again princess or to be royal usually meant divinity. In the Christian sense, to be a princess and stolen by a dragon represents Satan stealing an Evian woman, or an Evian representation of the church, or a physical manifestation of what the church is at that time. Um, and that's where the princess stolen by, a dragon comes from, with the knight being Christ coming in to free them from the dragon. Now, that's not just a Christian myth, but that's where the Christian stereotypes or tropes are are applied to the mythos of such a narrative. But again, the seed of the if it's the dragon himself that's against the woman, then again, this gives the idea that this creature works through getting other groups to do its bidding. The seed of the woman then isn't emanating not against the dragon, but against the seed of Adam. Thus, giving more of a context for why Cain and Abel had beef, why Seth and Cain created two different types of people. Because the line of Seth was from the line of Eve, in that he had more of the Evian qualities and more of the Evian traits. Now, something notable, and again, maybe the Bible was hinting towards something, or maybe, again, coincidence. Uh, Maybe coincidence, but as you have more children, you actually introduce more estrogen into the fetus. That extra dose of estrogen produces a more feminine child. One could say that Seth was more feminine than Cain if one was just going to work off plain genetics. Cain was most likely the most masculine, had the most testosterone immediately introduced to his system from Eve. Now, again, testosterone would have been something that was very, very much a trait found in Adam, but would have only been lightly introduced into Eve. She would not have had a strong concentration of testosterone in her just naturally, because she wouldn't have produced testosterone in the same kind of intensity as Adam would have, because she's not built or meant to be built the same way. So that, alongside chromosomal differences, would have allowed for a vast amount of differences between the different children being born, even within that one generation. But anyways, so Cain having more of an Adam-like aspect to him, I could completely see how he could be taken advantage by the serpent. Because again, it was made clear that Adam was going to toil his whole life. Why was it that Cain cultivated the land? Cain cultivated the land because he took after Adam. Why was it that Abel took care of the livestock? Because he was taken after Eve. But more importantly, on a much more localized level for both of them, Cain was the firstborn. He had to go through the aspects of the curse of God that Abel was not necessarily exposed to right off the bat. Sure, Abel had to protect the flocks from wolves and wild animals and dinosaurs, probably, who knows. But what he was doing was, in a way, not the same thing as going out into a stake of land, cultivating it from the ground up by chopping trees, digging up roots, then turning the soil, then waiting for the soil to go well, then letting it soak, then letting it actually be irrigated, then putting manure over it. First collected the animals, then do the manure, then putting manure over it, then waiting to go and plant the plants freaking self. After he already selected the plants and went through all of it, all that stuff Adam had to teach his children. And I can completely see how Cain took to one, much like how, not Boaz, but much like how Esau was said to be a very good outdoorsman. But a good outdoorsman does not mean you're necessarily a good pastor. And so, when Cain went to give his offering, he gave the offering of one who lives outdoors, one who lives and utilizes everything, and instead sacrifices what's left over to nature. I did not use all of this deer. Thank you, nature. Here's the leftovers. That is the way of the pagan. So you see these echoes of what paganism is in these patriarchs of proto paganism. Um, Likewise with Abel, you see this aspect of sheep and a sheep tender. Um, he most likely sheared the sheep to provide clothes for the family, because it's not like they only wore one pair of clothes. The stuff broke down over time. Um, they most likely provided food. He probably nursed the sheep. Probably brought them out to pasture. Probably made sure that they were protected from local animals. I mean, this was a man who had to be able to maintain a large amount of flocks, or at least a decent amount of flocks, in order to be able to be productive, to produce enough to feed a family for a whole year, and to provide an offering to the Lord. So these are the dynamics of early human civilization. Eve herself, because again, Eve was only able to do so much when she wasn't pregnant. But when she wasn't pregnant, she was teaching most likely. She was educating people as to what happened with the serpent, beginning the mythology. In fact, Eve was probably the first storyteller. It was likely not Adam. Adam was likely the first person to teach science. Eve was likely the first person to teach religion. And again, you can see this reflected because, again, patterns are reflected in reality. And one of the things that you see in the Bible is that people don't change, nothing is new under the sun. So oftentimes, patterns that we see reflected, even in our current society, reflect biblical patterns. I do not think it's that odd to assume that the current relationship between men and women is not the same thing that was established with Adam and Eve. So again, I could see completely how Cain would take more to his father's teachings of science, of how to tend to the land, how to care for nature, the things that God taught Adam to do as one who dominates the land and subjugates all of life under him, rather than the religious aspects of the curse and of the bad things that happen to him and of how he needs to redeem himself or be redeemed. He doesn't know which because he doesn't really care because he's only just trying to live for the next day and cultivate the land. So I could see completely how Cain would not respect God as a God of second chances, of a God that's trying to warn people, because to him, God is a God of creation and of destruction. And again, this is what it reflected in how he talks. He gets angry and upset and scared, and he says, I'm going to be destroyed when I leave, because he surely knows that there's going to be more people. He knows about the curse. So, in a way, God purged from Adam's line all of Adam's rebellion. Then he focused in on Eve. But what happened was the mixture between the two different families, but also between the, the fallen angels, the watchers, and the women of the world. And I think that what happened was that the women of Cain grew up more willing to work with the angels and more willing to be desired for the angels, whereas those who were of Seth's line were not necessarily too on board with that, which would have meant that there's both an equal measure of forceful intermixture, interbreeding, and accidental interbreeding, or purposeful interbreeding and then accidental interbreeding between the two families, as such tribes exist now, or would be allowed to intermingle over time and like actually fight out for dominance. And again, this would have created much bloodshed, and it would have just been a helpless slaughter of many different types and shades of people. So then you have this idea of the Nephilim. So you have mighty men rising up, you have all these different types of people rising up, and then the flood comes, wipes them all out, right? Well, genetically, no. The Nephilim rose again very quickly after the days of Noah. What does that entitle? That entitles that genetics plays a huge part in biblical prophecy. seed plays a huge part in biblical prophecy. A types, A sexuality plays more of a role than the genders do. Because ultimately, the purposes of God are revealed not from the two different paths, but from the path that you come from. Cosmetic man is for the dealing with the people and their self-conscious image, their feelings of self, and oftentimes you see that this is reflected in what people who are homosexual often go into in terms of their career fashions. One aspect of that could be the stereotype. One aspect of that could just be that that's how that's supposed to be naturally expressed. There are a lot of people who feel self-conscious about their image, and about themselves, and about how they look, and seek to reform it. I think that in terms of their skill expression, that would be where that's oriented. In terms of their mental orientation, it would be towards the mental protection and security, or providing mental and emotional security for other men to bond with and to heal. Because there's a certain limit to where men and women can empathize and understand each other, I believe. And I think that homosexual men bridge that gap in a much more healthy fashion for society. But again, that depends on if they have not surrendered to the urges that come with such a focus, because that which we focus on we desire. And I think that the focus on that skill, or the development of that natural instinct to provide security and shelter and a sense of emotional support for men to then bond with and to form tribal identities from which pedestry naturally would have been introduced. Because again, pedestry is a huge aspect of pagan societies, which meant that for anybody who has a pagan ancestor, which is all of us, we all have pedestry in our background, which means that our societies had built themselves before Christianity on the forced mating between men of older age or of one profession by those of lesser profession, slave men and younger men. And that was used as both a form of dominance, but also as a form of social respect. So you were kind of forced into it. And so that would have been bred into our species through, again, these people wouldn't remain homosexual, they were bisexual. So they would have these expressions of pedestry, then go home, have sex with their wife, and have kids, and then indoctrinate their kids to do the same thing for thousands of years. So the natural origins of homosexuality and bisexuality would have been formed from those kind of influences anyways, or at least those kind of, derivatives of the original influence, which would have been, okay, I have this extreme interest towards my own gender, not and I'm not having sex with them. So why do I have that? So that these men who otherwise cannot get in touch with their femininity, cannot learn how to build healthy relationships with females, can actually learn how to nurture and raise feminine people in their group. Likewise, I think the masculine women fulfill the same role that you'd see in chimpanzee pairs, wherein the females accompany the troop when they go on wars or when they go on raids or foraging, but she does not take the lead and she does not necessarily get involved too much with the fighting. But she does get involved in the sense of cheering people on, being involved in terms of carrying things back and stuff like that. So there's that aspect of being a helper being reflected in the feminine aspect of primates. Well, I think likewise, if for the male it is the expression of their builder aspects, that for the female it's the aspect of their reconciliation, their ability to adapt. In a sense, lesbian women, I think, allow for the bridging between women who struggle with being aggressive and nurturing. And so they allow for a safety network by which women can learn to build a stronger sense of self, a stronger sense of identity, a stronger sense of presence to then actually into the world. And I think this is reflected in differences found between male homosexuals and female homosexuals, where they found that two different types show very different mating and partner selecting behaviors and also different tendencies in how they express their sexuality. With women being more commonly bisexual in the end, or using homosexuality before reverting back to heterosexuality. So women are more versatile, whereas homosexual men tend to stay homosexual men. Homosexual women tend to become either bisexual uh, or heterosexual, or some sort of derivative of bisexuality. Um, there are many who stay homosexual, but that's again a subset. Large majority of those who start off homosexual branch off and become bisexual usually at the end. Again, maybe owing to the why we prefer polyamory again, because it allows for them to express both those types of aspects in their best qualities, let's say, because you have three people which bring them out. But again, I've seen that in practice, and I don't think it necessarily works out so much in practice as it does in theory. So yeah. What else? Oh, I forgot my brother left me a letter. I want to apply to it. Well, I'm getting tired. I am tired. The only thing I can ask for at this point is for guidance, Lord, day by day. If you have anything left for me to say, use my voice, use me to go ahead and talk about it. Jesus, bless my friends, my family, also those who oppose me and seek to destroy me. Let your will be done. Do not let them overcome me. Do not let the night consume me. Let me rise with the dawn and step into the light of your life, not into the false light, false Christs, false messiahs, those who pretend to be anointed. Let me be anointed with your spirit. Let me be poured, poured over with the oil of your heart and your glory. Let me have a peaceful mind and more patient nature, more understanding heart. Lord, give me the strength that I don't have. Help confirm the strength that you've already put inside of me. Help me realize the strength that I do have. In Jesus' name, amen. And this is why cats get burned on a stake. You guys literally act like familiars. Yeah, I know. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Maria, why are you caking? Yeah, exactly. You know better. She's like, oh, he's saying cakes. That means I'm getting pet. Cakes? Nah, the video is recording. You what? I watch a lot of freaking horror things. This is the moment in those horror things where, like, if it was Garfield, he'd turn into a giant slug monster thing and consume me. Yeah, sorry. A lot of creepypasta, man. When you stopped talking like that, I was like, wait, are you about to transform and consume me? The camera's on. I don't think you would do that on live television. But again, I don't have that many viewers. Whoa, no! Yeah? Okay. She kills me if I don't come back. I got realize you can't come back in this way, right? Okay. He's like, I will shit on your floor. I will shit on the floor and pee on everything. Pardon my French. That's just the best explanation for how they view this house. Anyways, night, folks. Take care of yourselves. God bless.